Here's my Power Specter World roaming build. It's not using a scepter because while scepter is good for supporting allies and for doing ranged damage, World versus World roaming requires a lot of mobility to be able to choose your fights and to chase kills. And while scepter has chill on it, it's a lot easier to outplay because you can see the projectile coming a mile away, and the set has no way to chase a target when you don't have line of sight on them or they're just going to run away from you. So I feel like the dagger pistol and the sword dagger are a nice set. And in the past, I would definitely say you shouldn't run two melee weapon sets on Thief. But with Spectre, it works out because you can fill the gap in between your initiative pools with Shroud and maintain that melee pressure and playstyle. So that's kind of why I've chosen those weapons. But let's get into the build. There are actually two variants of this build. There's the Critical Strikes version and the Deadly Arts version. The Critical Strikes version is just going to give you a lot more precision. It's going to give you a lot more ferocity, and it's going to give you a lot more fury uptime and just more damage because the Spectre trait line gives you pretty much all of the sustain that you need. And unlike Daredevil, it doesn't give any damage modifiers. So Critical Strikes allows you to get more value out of the damage that you deal. However, it provides absolutely no utility or survivability on top of the damage it gives. So it can be a little bit more burst oriented. And with this, you'll be using the Chronomancer rune, so you get a little bit more burst potential from the quickness whenever you use it well. Then you've got the Deadly Arts variant, which is pretty much the same thing, except you just replace Critical Strikes with Deadly Arts. You have Mug, which whenever you use your Steel Siphon, you'll get the healing and damage dealt. So it's a little bit more sustain. And then you've got Weakness whenever you poison. So it's a little bit harder of a power counter. So Spectre is actually very good against Condi classes because in Shroud, you're cleansing tons of conditions. But it is very weak to power damage because while you're in Shroud, it's not like Necromancer Shroud where you have a damage reduction in there. So the weakness from Deadly Arts is actually really good. And then you've got Panic Strike as well because you've got the sword set and you'll be immobilizing with that. So that'll give out poison, which can give out weakness. And it just works out really well with the sword dagger set to have Panic Strike. And just in general, when you get someone below 50% HP, you can finish them off if they can't dodge from the immobilize. And then you got Improvisation, which will recharge one of your utilities whenever you land steel. And while this is not the best because it doesn't give you the second stolen ability effect because you don't have stolen abilities, it can still give you, Shadow Step Back, which is a 50-second cooldown. It can give you your Well of Bounty twice, or it can allow you to use Infiltrator Signet aggressively and then recharge it back to use it again later. So Improvisation just gives you a lot more utility and chasing potential in ports or disengage. So it's just nice to have the extra utility and survivability and a little bit more damage as well from Deadly Arts. It still gives you some damage, but Critical Strikes is just pure damage. So if you want to choose between those, that's kind of like the idea there. Now for the equipment, I take all Marauders because Shroud scales with Vitality, so you really want to have Marauder. The rune choice is going to depend on the build, so if you're running the Critical Strikes variant, you're going to be running Chronomancer because that'll give you a lot more burst potential with the quickness whenever you use a well. And with the Deadly Arts variant, you'd want to use Fireworks rune because it'll give you the Fury uptime that you're going to be lacking because Critical Strikes gives you a lot of Fury uptime. And while you do have Fury from using your Steel, the Spectre playstyle doesn't really steal when it's doing its damage. It wants to steal to interrupt from afar or to kind of like utility based. So you're generally going to have your Fury run out when you're trying to do damage. So the Fury uptime is really important. So you either go Critical Strikes for the Fury uptime or you go for the Fireworks rune. And then for the weapons, I have Celerity Sigil on my dagger pistol set and then an air sigil. For the Critical Strikes variant, you want the Air Sigil, and for the Deadly Arts variant, you want the Absorption Sigil, because the interrupts that give you the boon removal from, well, let's just show it. The Absorption Sigil here is going to steal 3 boons when interrupting a foe. And you have a lot of CC on the Shroud abilities, and you have Headshot and you have Steal. So there's a lot of ways for you to interrupt, and that will give you the ability to remove boons and really single targets out that are tankier. And then for the Sword Dagger set, I use Energy Cleansing. This is mostly used as a defensive weapon set, and also Swap Sigils will trigger when you enter Shroud. So let's go over the traits that I haven't gone over yet. So Critical Strikes obviously is the one that I'm showing right now, but you could replace that with Deadly Arts. And Trickery is just going to have all of the normal stuff you take as a power thief. You want the Fury Uptime whenever you steal. Swiftness is also pretty important because this build does not really have permanent swiftness. So you get swiftness from your sword too and from stealing. So if you're running the Deadly Arts variant, you'll have 25% move speed with the Fireworks rune. But with the Critical Strikes one, I don't have permanent swiftness, so you have to use your steal often and your sword too to get that swiftness uptime. And then whenever you steal, you'll also steal boons and gain vigor. This is just pretty much the bread and butter of the thief playstyle, because when you want to kill a target, you remove their boons and you make them susceptible to damage, because Bountiful Theft actually prioritizes stability, protection, and Aegis. So it's really nice. Then finally, it's Sleight of Hand. Just going to reduce your Siphon cooldown, and it's going to daze whenever you steal. In Specter, we're going to have a couple of choices here between Shallow Grave, which is a little bit more selfish, and the Consume Shadows. Shallow Grave essentially will, if you die, it'll put you in Shroud and use up your Shroud if you have enough Shroud left. And if the target you are tethered to, which is a mechanic we'll talk about later, dies, it'll reduce all of your Shroud and give them barrier instead. And that's a pretty long cooldown, so it's not the best. But if you're in World versus World, there's a lot of one-shot builds there, and it can actually save you a lot of time. So I kind of prefer Shallow Grave, but there's another reason why, is because you can't really take Second Opinion because it does nothing. And Consume Shadows is more of a selfless trait, because it will remove all of your Shroud every time you leave Shroud and provide that to nearby allies and yourself as healing or barrier, depending on how much health they have. So if you're losing your Shroud every time you leave, it really makes you vulnerable because you have to regain your Shroud again, which this build has plenty of Shroud generation. But if you're playing like a solo player, you do really want to maintain your Shroud because it's a lot safer and more selfish, right? But in more group content where you're roaming with like 5 players, Consume Shadows can actually give quite a bit of value to your team. So consider taking that. But this is designed for solo roaming or duo roaming, where if you're getting focused and you can't survive, then this is definitely better. And then you have Traversing Dusk, which gives alacrity whenever you use a well to nearby allies if they're in the well when it starts. And it will give healing to nearby allies and yourself whenever you Shadow Step, as well as Life Force or Shadow Force. And you have a lot of ports on this build. So you have all the wells are ports. You have Shadow Step, you have Infiltrator Signet, you've got Infiltrator Strike, you've got your Shadow Shot, and all of these will proc the Traversing Dusk trait and give you more Shadow Force and give you healing. So a lot of your sustain comes from this trait because it's giving you that healing and it's giving you Shroud generation. So a lot of times what you can do is just spam your Infiltrator Strike and go in and go out. And since you're nonstop porting, you're sustaining and gaining more Shroud to get into your next, Shroud. So it's a really good trait. Then finally you have Hungering Darkness. This has been nerfed in PvP, but not nerfed in World versus World. So it cleanses a condition every second you're in Shroud and heals you whenever it does so. And it will also transfer conditions from the ally that you're tethered to. So it's really good for supporting. And in PvP, where it's literally 3 seconds, so it's triple the duration that it takes to get that interval. It's not so good there, and it actually makes you pretty susceptible. But in World versus World, you're extremely tanky because of this trait. So yeah, there's nothing else you can really take here. Let's talk about the Shroud abilities. So of course, you gain Shroud whenever you use a port and you use initiative in combat. So just by spamming sword 2, I'm gaining tons of Shroud here. Very easy to get. Your steel will also give you a lot of Shroud whenever you land it. So what does the Shroud do? When you go in Shroud, you have a second health bar, and all damage dealt to you will hit that health bar instead of your actual health. So it makes you a lot tankier. But it will also tether you to a nearby ally. If you're not targeting anyone, then it will just target the nearest ally that it decides to choose, and you can change the target based on your steal. So if I want to change who I'm tethered to while I'm in Shroud, I can steal to another ally. As you can see, the tether broke there. I'll re-steal, and now it tethers to this target. So the tether is pretty important because not only will it heal and cleanse every second that target, but it will also do extra effects based on landing abilities in Shroud. So for example, the one skill is just this long range kind of auto attack. It's pretty reliable, but doesn't do a lot of damage. But it's actually healing and giving might to whatever I'm tethered to here. It looks like it's tethering to a gate or something. But it's healing, not a lot, but it's definitely healing the target every time I hit. So you want to be landing your abilities to actually heal the target more. And then you've got your Shroud 2, which will heal and cleanse your tethered ally. And this ability does a lot of damage. It's a ground target, which you can use. It's pretty long range. It's 900 range, and it's a combo finisher blast. So you want to be using that pretty much off cooldown because it's so versatile and does a lot of damage. And it's a low cooldown. It's a 5-second cooldown. So you just want to spam this out. It does a lot of damage and gives sustain. Then you've got Dawn's Repose, which is like a leap ability. It's a leap finisher. So you can use that to combo with other things we'll talk about later. And it will also fear and give barrier when it lands. So if you're tethered to someone, it'll give them barrier based on how many enemies you hit. And it will also fear them, which is a pretty decent CC, right? Then you have Eternal Night, which is your big damage ability in Shroud. It's very short range though, so you have to use this in like really close melee range, but it does a double strike in front of you, and that will give out Torment, Poison, and Weakness. So it does a lot of effects on it, and a lot of your damage is just on those two abilities, so Shroud 2 and Shroud 4. So often when you're doing your burst in Shroud, what you'll do is you'll go in, say you have like a CC on them and they'll get hit by anything, you'll go in, you use your 2 and your 4, and that's a lot of burst damage right there. Your 5 skill is a area of effect like this, and when it finishes, when it activates like that, it'll stun nearby enemies and give stability to allies. So that's a interesting ability because the timing of it, where it's delayed, allows you to combo it with other skills that are not in your Shroud. So you can do a precasted Shroud 5 and then go in with your Sword 2, and then it stuns. Then you can go in with your Cloak and Dagger and then swap to Backstab. And it actually allows you to land your backstabs a lot more reliably. As far as the weapon skills, you've got Heartseeker on Dagger. This is your leap finisher that you can use to combo with your smoke fields. And it's a good way of finishing targets because it does more damage the lower their health percentage. Then you've got Shadow Shot, which is a port. So it's going to give you the value of healing you and giving you Shadow Force. And it's a nice blind and chasing potential. Then you've got Headshot. The Daze is really nice because it can interrupt targets. Really good for pressuring people and preventing them from getting their heals off. And Black Powder is a smoke field that can blind and be used to hard seeker through for your stealth. Now you can also use a lot of other things to get stealth. So you have Enshroud, your 2 skill is a blast, and your 3 is a leap, and your 5 is also a blast. You can use the 5 and then delay, use the black powder, and that will blast it. However, you have to be careful with that because the AoE of the 5 skill will actually do damage, though it doesn't do much, so it'll reveal you. So actually the 5 is the least reliable way of getting it because it's delayed, and the 3 is a leap, which means that you can hit something and you won't get revealed from it. And then the 2 skill is a blast finisher that does damage. However, if you see here, you can use it and the 2 skill, and I actually get stealth. So it's kind of different from other blast finishers in that way that it won't reveal you. So that's kind of nice. And then you have your sword dagger set. So your 2 skill is your main way of moving around with this build. You have to be really good at targeting things and remembering where your return spots are. You have your flanking strike, which is your main evade, because you don't have many evades on Specter, so really using flanking strike is important. And it's also nice for the unblockable, and of course it turns into larcenous strike, which is an unblockable boon rip, which does decent amount of damage. Dancing dagger is just a range damage that will bounce and cripple and give torment, but really the build has not much use of dancing dagger unless you can't go into melee range for whatever reason. So this is like your only range damage other than your shroud 1 and 2 skill. And then you have cloak and dagger, which is a pretty hard hitting attack that'll put you in stealth, and then when you're in stealth you can use your sneak attack. The sword sneak attack isn't amazing, but what you can do is you can use the sword sneak attack and then swap to dagger pistol and then use backstab. So that's a combo you'll often see me do. I'll go into my shroud, use all my shroud abilities. You want to always use your 2 and 4 before leaving shroud because those are your big damage. And then once you leave, or you're about to leave shroud, use the 5 skill. Then you precast into the stun, and then you cloak and dagger, and then swap and backstab, so that you can make sure that you land the backstab. Because if you pour it on someone and they see that you cloak and dagger, they're usually going to dodge. So you want to pour it in right as that stun happens, cloak and dagger, and then swap and backstab. And you can get a decent amount of damage from that. You want to make sure that you have the ground targeting set to instant, and you want to allow skill retargeting because that can allow you to use your well utilities and change their position, because the situation might change by the time you finish casting the skill because they have a decently long cast time. Now the wells themselves, Well of Gloom will heal you, and it will heal a little bit in a pulse, but it will also cripple in a pulse. And this cripple pulse will actually remove blind from you because even though it does no damage, it's attempting an attack. So it won't reveal you in stealth, but it will remove blind. So it's always really nice to put Well of Gloom on top of a like down state situation where you'll get a lot of blinds and CCs, and it'll remove Aegis and stuff like that. So it's a really good well to use aggressively, in other words. And then you've got Shadow Step, as always. You want to be using that as an unaggressive tool for getting like stomps to secure those, or it's a nice disengage tool. And then the Well of Bounty is pretty interesting. It's the lowest cooldown well, and it will port you in, and then the area will pulse boons on you. And these boons are pretty strong, and there's an ordering of those boons. So as you can see at the top, there's regeneration. If you don't have regeneration, it'll give you that. Then it'll give you protection, and then resistance, then swiftness and vigor, and then so on. If you already have the boons at the top, it'll just go down to the next and give you that. Then you've got Infiltrator Signet, which is useful for porting to targets. It allows you to be more melee oriented with the build, to stick to targets, because most of your damage is melee. So if you're getting kited, then you're going to be in a bad spot. So you can do some cool tricks where you port in and sort of have like a core thief playstyle where you can do a steal backstab mechanic with the infiltrator signet, or you can just use it to combine with your Shroud 5, and then you can port in with your infiltrator signet before it finishes. Say if you're in like the dagger pistol set and you're not in range or you can't swap to your sword, you can just go in with the infiltrator signet and then just Heartseeker spam. And of course, you also have the celerity sigil. So if you port in with that combo, then you could do a lot of damage. Then you have Shadowfall, which will pull enemies in towards the center of the well, and pretty much it's a CC, so it will proc your celerity sigil, and you can do a lot of damage. So while your Shadowfall is out, you want to unleash all of your initiative into the target, and then go into your Shroud and do 2 into 4, and then leave Shroud immediately, and then just keep auto attacking or using your initiative abilities that deal damage, because you can do a lot of damage while enemies are locked down by that. So you don't want to spend time in Shroud when you're using abilities that don't really do damage. So you use the 2 and the 4 quickly, and then you keep Heartseekering or using like Cloak and Dagger into other abilities. But you don't want to CC them necessarily, so you want to hit them in the front with your Tactical Strike, because that's a blind, not a daze. Because if you daze them, then you'll remove the stun, which will allow them to dodge out. Playstyle has many different combos, but generally when you open on a target, you're going to go in with your sword 2, Cloak and Dagger, and then you'll swap to your backstab then, and then you'll try to follow through with like a shadow shot, and then you go in Shroud, use all of your damaging abilities, your 2 and your 4, and if they're going to counter pressure you, then you'll generally need to stay in Shroud longer. You can use your 3 skill to get a fear, and then use another 2, and then before you leave Shroud, you'll use your 5, and then you can time that to get another burst on them. From there, if they don't have any dodges, you can land your Shadowfall and then unload all of your initiative into them. And if you do that all quickly enough, you can swap back into your Infiltrator's Strike, because it's a 15-second duration and weapon swap is only 10-second duration or cooldown. So you can go into your sword, do your dagger, and then go into Shroud, leave Shroud, and then swap back into sword, and then you can return back to your original location. So you can kind of like be in and do all of that damage, be kind of tanky with your Shroud, and then get back out with your sword. There are also a decent amount of combos with your ports. With the Infiltrator's Signet, you can, instead of going in with your sword 2 into Cloak and Dagger, you can just Cloak and Dagger with your Infiltrator's Signet. Or what you can do is the normal core thief steal combo, where you would use your black powder and then Heartseeker steal, but since your steal has a cast time, can't really do that. So instead you use the Infiltrator Signet as like your steal in that case, and you Heartseeker, which through the black powder combo gives you stealth, and then you're right on top of the target, and then you can position your backstab. So there is quite a bit of combos that you want to be doing and baiting out cooldowns so that you can land your big Shadowfall combo into your Shroud 2, 4, and then just unleash a lot of damage. Shadowfall can also be casted and then increase the range of it with your Infiltrator Signet or even your Infiltrator Strike. Now I think that the Infiltrator Strike is maybe not intended because that has a cast time as well, but the Infiltrator Signet is really interesting because you can wait until you've already moved the location from the port from the well, and then right before it lands and creates that well, you put the Infiltrator Strike down, and then you essentially increase the range of your well, which is really good for catching people off guard with a skill they weren't expecting to have that much range. When you're disengaging a fight, you also have to understand how targeting works. You want to be able to target structures or neutral mobs in the distance and use your sword 2 to port to them. And then from there, you don't want to use your sword 2 again unless they're really chasing you hard. And then you can juke back with your Shadow Step and your Infiltrator's Strike. Or you can just use stealth, because you do have a lot of access to stealth on this build, even though you aren't in Shadow Arts. So you can go your Black Powder into your Heartseekers, but you do have a lot less initiative, so you can only do like 2 heart seekers generally. So what you can do is your black powder into shroud, and then you shroud 2, and then wait for that a little bit, and then use your shroud 3 out of that to leap away. Just make sure you don't hit anything, because then you'll reveal yourself. So yeah, that's pretty much how you play the Power Specter. And if you like this content, then like the video, subscribe for more, and leave a comment down below if you have any suggestions for the build. I have 2 variants, but maybe there's another. And leave your account name as well, because I'll give away a community chest to one of the commenters within the next few days. With that being said, I'll see you all next time.